I am of Puritan origin. I have 13 European nationalities and 2 American Indian tribes in my DNA. I am an American, in other words. If you kill an American, as Melville said, you spill the blood of all mankind. And I was brought up to respect diversity, and I believe in it. I served as a diplomat, and the basis of diplomacy, real diplomacy, as opposed to pronouncements and declaratory diplomacy and statements by courtiers in the capital. The real diplomacy is based on empathy. That is different from sympathy. It does not mean that I have to agree with people, but it does mean that I have to understand their beliefs and why they have them, and how intensely they hold them, and how they see their interests. If you can't do that, you can't conduct successful diplomacy. So I think my journey, to the extent I've had one, has been one of learning other languages, becoming familiar with other cultures, looking into the eyes of people who don't think the way I do, and trying to think, consider how they do think, and respecting that. Because if you don't respect it, they don't respect you, and you don't have any basis for an effective communication. So diplomats, I would say, and I understand perfectly what you're saying about the IAS and so on.
Yeah.
But because I think, well, it's worse than that. I think everybody in the IAS was born knowing everything they need to know. There's no need for them to study anything else, because it's innate. God gave it to them, or one of the gods gave it to them. Anyway.
It's a British colonial system now mixed with Indian caste elitism wrapped up in it, so it has become even worse.
But I'll tell you, if you dig into this, you'll find something very interesting, and that is, when the British, meaning the East India Company, were faced with the job of governing the vast population, diverse population that is India, because India is really a subcontinent, like Europe. It's full of diversity, as diverse as Europe, I think. And so when they were faced with that, they had to invent a system. What did they look at? They looked at the Chinese civil service system explicitly. There's a lot of, they borrowed from French Jesuits and others who wrote, partly ignorantly and too admiringly, of the Chinese system. So what is that system? It's a meritocracy. It's based on examinations.
Are you referring to people like Matteo Ricci and others that went to the Qing?
Not so much Matteo Ricci, although he provided much of the information, but Montaigne, Montesquieu, French philosophers, predecessors of the Enlightenment in Europe, who admired the Chinese system. Voltaire admired it greatly. And the British thought, well, if we are going to have a system based on exams, what are we going to examine people in? We can't examine them in Sanskrit, I mean, that would be sort of beside the point. That would be like the Chinese system, where you're examined in Confucian texts. No, we need to look at British classics. Well, are there any British classics? There weren't. So they invented Shakespeare as a classic, which is why everyone who is educated in India to this day has a better knowledge of various phrases from Shakespeare than anyone in the West still does. This is a very interesting system. As you say, it has been overlaid with all sorts of things. The caste system you mentioned, yes, but also sectionalism. I mean, there's a reason that people from Tamil Nadu don't want Hindi as the national language. Because they're pretty good at English. And even if I once, when I was in India, I will say, served as the interpreter between 2 Indians who were both speaking English. I could understand both of them, and they could understand me, but they could not understand each other.
Each other's language.
So anyway, it's a very interesting elitist system, quite effective, underpowered in the diplomatic area. The Indian Foreign Ministry is understaffed and not well organized, in my experience. Very, very bright people. Yes, of course. Very arrogant, as you said. But not enough of them, and not sufficiently well trained in a number of ways. I'm not extolling the virtues of our foreign service because I think it has many things wrong with it, including arrogance and a tendency to toe the official line without questioning it adequately. But I don't think it's very professional. And the reason for that is we have a political spoils system, which means that the heads of missions abroad are often people with fat wallets and fat heads. And anyway, they're learning on the job. They don't know what they're doing. Yeah, I think diplomacy, when it is taken seriously and pursued professionally, is a learned profession as much as the law or theology or the military. In the case of the United States, it is a proto-profession. And I think in the case of India, that may be true too. I'm very impressed by what the Chinese are doing in terms of educating their diplomats. This is not to say that they don't make mistakes. I mean, they copied Mike Pompeo with wolf warrior diplomacy, which was extremely ineffective both for them and for us. And they should have known better. Anyway, this is an interesting area. I have spent a lot of time thinking about what makes diplomacy effective. And it is not simple. And I am frankly appalled by many in my own country who look at situations like Ukraine or Gaza and proceed to make moral judgments on the basis of inadequate information or disinformation, and don't ask about the realistic prospect of dealing with the situation. They're more concerned to say who is to blame for this than they are to resolve it. And I think a professional diplomat's attitude is, let's find a way to minimize the harm if we can't resolve this. I don't think we do that very much. And so this is a problem.
I guess one of the inspiring things that I found about you while reading your book, something that touched me, is the combination of the kind of realism that you just spoke about, but also combine that with some sort of basic decent values. I mean, there is this one moment in your book where you said that I don't see how Israeli military can help the US military a lot unless perhaps we are talking about these assassination campaigns, and covert operations. And then you follow it up by saying that in which case I would not like to see my country being messed up in these assassination campaigns, which is not necessarily born of real politics, but also comes out of values that you spoke about.
I don't believe that that there is no limit to realpolitik. Mm-hmm. There must be a moral limit. At some point, you must express your values, or you're not a human being. You're some sort of monster. And I think the American foreign policy tradition is far too heavy on hypocritical statements of values and not heavy enough on realism. Europeans are the other way. I think there's a middle way. Right. And that is what we should look for. And if you read a book I wrote called Arts of Power, you will find it has a short section on the ethics of diplomacy. That is, reason of system, you must preserve the system so that it minimizes violence and maximizes the prospects for nonviolent resolution of disputes. Reason of state, you cannot substitute your individual moral judgment for that of a legitimate government that's giving you instructions. But you can't get rid of your individual moral judgment. And finally, in the end, there is an ethic of diplomatic interaction. If I interact with you and I lead you to believe that I'm going to do this or that, and I make either an implied or an explicit commitment, and then I violate that, I have behaved immorally. Because you have a right to believe, to take my word seriously, and to rely on it. And if you can't rely on it, I'm no better than an animal. So I think within realism, there are limits, and there are also values. And I argue that interests are not the same as values, that values are what give interests that charge them with their intensity. So if you have an interest in, let's say, independence, and that will be charged with values of self-regard, self-esteem, and so forth, and it will become the supreme interest that you have. And you will do anything to defend your cultural and political and economic autonomy and self-determination. And that is at work now in the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, who have conflicting interests and values. And I'm sorry to say that the Palestinians have learned a great deal from the Israelis about how not to behave.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.